welcome to those who weren't here this morning, and then those who were here and have returned. Welcome back, and thanks for coming back. We appreciate it. We are, as it were, going into phase 2 of our encounter today. And in a way, well, more than in a way, at the end of the presentation on Dogon cosmology, the Dogon man and the cosmos, we talked about the phenomenon of the great year and the precession of the equinoxes. And what we said is that we were going to go more deeply, since that word has come up several times, into that subject matter. And that is what we propose to do this afternoon. Now, one of the things that I can say by way of preliminary comments is that in the ancient system of Kemet, or the Nile Valley, I often do now say more Nile Valley rather than Egypt or even Kemet, because the Nile Valley encompasses not only Kemet but also Kush, what anciently was called Egypt and Ethiopia, because they were both they were culturally, fundamentally one people, and ethnically, for that matter, one people. The differences are kind of like the differences would be kind of like the difference there would be between, say, an Englishman and a Scotsman, a German and an Austrian, an Italian and a Sicilian. Those are variations, those are regional variations of basically one people. And this is exactly what it was like in ancient times with Kemet and Kush. So that is why I more and more refer to the Nile Valley. But there's a concept that was operative throughout their history, and you could even see it also operative among the Dogons, and that is the idea, as above, so below, that the earth was in some way, well, no, not some way, is a mirror of heaven. And events on earth are mirror of heavenly events. As I said earlier, there was this concept that you could conceive of or imagine as the cosmos itself as a cosmic, divine, human form, if you like. And at the micro level, Earth and human beings are a very minute manifestation of the divine, the divine man of the cosmos. So, in every way, there's this idea that as above, so below. The second idea from this is that heaven itself is a book. And if you know how to read that book, you can not only understand everything that has happened, you can understand everything that's gonna happen and is happening now. So in that sense, when you look at it that way, the original Bible was a heavenly book, because Bible is just a Greek word, derives from a Greek word that means book. That's all it means. And so that the first Bible, you might say, was a cosmic Bible, and that things written here on earth were just written manifestations on earth of knowledge that comes from the heavens, ultimately. And that, I think, informs what we're going to try to do this afternoon. And so you'll understand, I think, before we go too far, why we call it the Wheel of Heaven, the astronomical chronology of the Nile Valley. Let's take the next slide. Now, let's just read this. The gyration of the pole. We've already, as I say, introduced this earlier today, but it's worth not only reintroducing it to those who heard it earlier, but of course going into it in some depth and detail for those who are coming here for the first time today. The earth experiences 3 motions: a rotation around its axis, a revolution around its sun, and a gyration of its pole around the pole of the ecliptic. And we'll explain what this ecliptic is, because it's actually a simple idea, but the word is just not familiar to a lot of people, so we will explain it. This latter motion is caused by the 23.5 degree tilt of the earth from vertical. This 23.5 degree tilt is caused by the combined gravitational pull of the sun and the moon on the earth. So the earth doesn't rotate straight up and down, it tilts as it rotates. This results in a gyration of the magnetic pole backwards around the vertical pole, the pole of the ecliptic, which takes 25,900 years to complete. This motion is called the precession, not procession, the precession. And there are two ways to track it. One is that you mark the succession of constellations in the band of the zodiac that rise heliacally, that is before the sun, at the spring equinox. The way I explained it this morning is that imagine yourself able to stand on the first day of spring right before the sun rises. You will see a constellation that rises in the east. That will right now be Pisces. If you watch for very much longer, you do this every year at springtime, right before the sun rises, you will eventually see that Pisces will no longer be visible and Aquarius will come up. And you have to continue to watch and observe once a year at the spring equinox, right before the sun comes up, for another 2,160 years. And then you will no longer be able to see the constellation of Aquarius, it'll be the constellation of Capricorn. So, if you could make that observation, stand facing the east, every year at the spring equinox, right before the sun, after 25,900 years, you would come right back to the same constellation you started looking at in the first place. This is what they call the precession of the equinoxes. And those constellations are all the constellations of what we today call the zodiac. Why is it called the zodiac? It comes from a Greek word zoion, which means animals. Why? Because so many, if you just know anything about the zodiac, so many of the zodiac constellation signs are animal forms. Bull, lion, ram, etc. So that's the reason why it was called the zodiac. We can go into that a little further, but let's move on. Now, the second way of tracking this precession, and in ancient times it was sometimes referred to as the great year, is to follow the movement of the circumpolar constellations, that is, the constellations that revolve around the pole, that transit to and through the magnetic pole. Now, E.A. Wallace Budge described the Egyptian polar axis as follows. There was a northern support called Weptah, like a tent pole. The moon and sun moved under the plate, but the stars were hung in it like a lamp, and the stars were called lamps. Now, Weptah is literally top of the earth. That's what it means. That's what that word means in Egyptian, top of the earth. And it's the Egyptian term for the pole, the North Pole. The stars that were hung on the plate like a lamp were the circumpolar stars, the stars circling around the pole. The Egyptian circumpolar stars were Akemu Seku, that is, the never-setting stars or the imperishable stars. Next slide, please. Now, this just is a schematic or a diagram that shows you what the precession looks like. A toy, just get a toy top and spin it. And if it's not spinning up and down, you will see it wobbling in a circle like that. So a top, even a toy top, basically has a precessional movement. All right? So the Earth, because it spins like that and wobbles, that's the phenomenon that causes that gyration around the pole. You see that vertical line. That's the vertical axis. And so that top revolves around that vertical axis. That's exactly what the Earth does. Next slide, please. Precession of the equinoxes. Okay, this is another look at it, okay? So the north pole of the ecliptic is the straight up and down or vertical axis. The celestial north pole is the tilted axis, 23.5 degrees. And it's the celestial north pole slowly gyrates backward around the north pole of the ecliptic. It takes nearly 26,000 years to complete. Okay? This is the reason why when you look at this phenomenon, it doesn't go forward in the zodiac, it actually goes backwards. So I said Pisces, Remember? And then when Pisces is no longer visible, it's Aquarius. And then when Aquarius is no longer visible, it's Capricorn, etc., etc. 26,000 years later, you come right back to Pisces. This is another way of looking at the precession of the equinox. Next slide. This is, again, another comprehensive schematic. And I'm just trying to give you a visual image of what it is we're talking about, all right? Because the Earth revolves in a flat plane around the sun. That's its ecliptic path, all right? But since it is tilted, the Earth has an equator that's 23.5 degrees off of that plane. That's the reason why you get the Tropic of Cancer, 23.5 degrees north, and the Tropic of Capricorn, 23.5 degrees south, all right? Now, what happens for us from the point of view of perception, we don't see, or we can't visualize from where we stand this movement of the Earth around the sun as such. The sun appears to us on December 22nd at noon to be at a low point in the horizon, okay? Then after that, it begins to, on subsequent days, move to a higher point on the horizon at noon. Again, it goes up like that, so that on June 21st, it reaches its highest point on the horizon, nearly overhead, and that's the summer solstice. However, when the sun does that, or appears to do that, it comes a point where the ecliptic path of the sun, which we perceive as the sun moving up on the horizon, actually crosses the celestial equator, which is just the Earth's equator projected out into space. That's the crossing of the sun with the celestial equator, the ecliptic. That is the equinoxes, the spring equinox and the autumn equinox. Okay? That is when day and night are of equal length. Okay? Now, when we talk about the precession of the equinoxes, it's at this point here, which is the spring equinox. I'm talking about that if you look at the whatever constellation is rising right before the dawn, and then you watch that, and then that changes over time. That's what the equinox. It precesses through the equinoxes. Precess through the 12 signs of the zodiac is what it amounts to. 2,160 years each time, give or take. All right. Now I know this is a lot, but that's why I want these visual images so that you don't have to just listen to me and try to understand what I'm saying, but you can kind of visualize what it is we're talking about. Next slide, please. Okay, it's the same thing. Next slide. Okay. The cosmic plan in the book of heaven. The types were those natural images turned into symbols that were projected into the heavens by ancient African man and preserved intact in Egypt down to the Christian era. Thus, each constellation sign, as a type, was endowed with a name, story, symbolic essence, and spiritual energy, embodying the ebb and flow of the cosmic forces that impacted man's fate individually and collectively. To the ancients, there is a plan, and that plan can be read in the book of heaven, which I've already talked about, once the keys are accessible. In the Hermetic dictum, as above, so below, resides one of those keys, because it means that history is written first in the heavens before being enacted on earth. So says Thoth Hermes to his disciple Asclepios, who the ancient Greeks identified with Imhotep. In the Hermetic text of the early Christian era, do you not know, Asclepios, that Egypt is an image of heaven? Or to speak more exactly, in Egypt, all of the operations of the powers which rule and work in heaven have been transferred down to earth below. So this is the reason why Egypt created all those temples. They were spiritual sanctuaries. And sanctuaries where the divine could come and live among people. And not only affect the destinies of the people of Egypt and the Nile Valley, but the destinies of the people of Africa, because it all came out of Africa anyway, and indeed the whole world. It wasn't just Egypt, it was also what we call Nubia or Kush, which is now the northern third of the Sudan. Okay? You know, they said if you started excavating what's available in the Sudan right now, you would excavate for the next 200 to 300 years and not unlayer everything. It is, they know that there are at least 1 million mounds that are archaeologically significant in the Sudan alone. Another story, but I just wanted to let you know that we're not, although we keep talking about Egypt because that's what we know about, that's the reason why I'm more likely like to be more inclusive and encompassing and talk about the Nile Valley. Okay, next slide please. This is the Egyptian zodiac. All right. So that even though it is said that the zodiac that we know today comes from Greece, it is only because Greece took the types, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, the Scarab, from where? Kemet. Because after 330 AD, for 300 years, Egypt was ruled by who? The Macedonian Greeks. The thing to note, by the way, is that Cancer in the Egyptian zodiac was actually a scarab beetle. Only when it became turned into a Greek zodiac did it turn into a crab. Okay? Next slide, please. I don't think we have I don't want to go into this too much, but these are just some of the evolutions of the zodiac signs in ancient Egypt. But let's keep going. Okay, this is the first drawing of the zodiac of Dendra, 1803. Dendra was a temple dedicated to Hathor, the goddess of love and beauty and sensuality, and one of the oldest deities of ancient Egypt, built in 100 BC. But that temple built on 100 BC was just a recreation of a temple that had been built 1,500 years before in the same place. And they just rebuilt it. And that temple had been a recreation of the temple that had been built 1,500 years before that. And so so Dendra was a temple that had first been built 3,000 years earlier. And it's hard to see, but both the zodiac, both the constellation signs around the North Pole and the zodiac constellation signs are all contained in the zodiac of Dendra. Okay? I want to call your attention. I don't really have a pointer. I want to call your attention. Let's see, where is it now? Where can I find it? Okay, note this. That's the jackal, and that's the North Pole. And, oh shoot, where is it? Okay, go to the next slide. Maybe I can see it better on the next slide. Yeah. Oh yeah. There's the jackal, North Pole, and this is the calf, the calf of Jehudi, calf ape. Okay? I want you to remember that. The calf ape. Because that was a symbol of Thoth or Jehudi, who was a god of mind, will, intelligence, and the messenger deity. And we'll see that. And the jackal, for the ancient Egyptians, is where the North Pole resided. I want you to remember that too, because that's going to become significant before we're finished. Next slide, please. These are depictions of the two precessions at Dendra. It's a depiction of the precession around the North Pole as well as the precession around the zodiac. And you can see, now this was 100 BC. This is about the time when the constellation Aries was no longer visible. Aries Aram was no longer visible on the eastern horizon, and Pisces started emerging as the constellation that you could see right before the dawn. Now remember, when you could, in the ancient Egyptian system, we talk about the 26,900 year, 5,900 year great year or precession of the equinoxes. Divided into 12, quote, months. Each month lasting 2,160 years. And so when Pisces started rising, in the great year, that was considered the month of Pisces, or the age of Pisces, which has supplanted the month of Aries, which is the age of Aries. Okay? So what this shows, that Dendra was built, that last building of Dendra, that temple, and that construction of that zodiac happened right about the time that Pisces was just beginning. You can see, because it was on the eastern, it is due east through Pisces, the orientation of that zodiac. Okay, we don't have time to go into this in more depth and detail, but Dendra is one of the most precious relics and representations of this ancient system of the world's great year and of the wheel of heaven. Next slide, please. And it shows you the same thing happening around the North Pole, so that Polaris is the North Pole today. It shows it, the process of it coming into the North Pole, into the constellation of what the Egyptians called the Jackal, but was later changed by the Greeks to the Little Bear or the Little Dipper. But the Egyptians, it was the jackal or wolf, fox or dog. And that's the original type, okay? The original archetype. Next slide, please. Now this is the northern circumpolar heaven. I want to call your attention because, again, this is going to become important. Right now you see it's in the Little Bear, right there. The tail of the bear. That's where the North Pole is. But in this century, and this is the reason why this century is so important, it's the only time in 26,000 years that two ages are going to shift within 11 years of one another. Now, who is coming in behind the Little Bear? Because it's going to shift out about 2050. This is a sign of Cepheus. Cepheus, the king. I'm going to save that part. That's a good punchline. I'm going to wait for that one, because it resonates to us in this very moment. Next slide, please. The galaxy spinning around a black hole. As I said earlier today, this galaxy, the Milky Way, spins around the center of a galaxy, which is its black hole. The black hole is a region of space which has of infinite density and gravity, where the gravity is so powerful that not even light can escape it. You can't even, so you can never see a black hole, but you have to infer it because there's nothing else there. And anything that goes, and they have what they call an event horizon around the black hole. And when you go across that event horizon, nothing, not even light, is going to come back out. All right? Now, it also emits unimaginably powerful energies, both visible and invisible, detectable and not detectable, that race out of the middle of that black hole into the galaxy, which is our galaxy, the Milky Way, at the speed of light. Okay? Now, we are located in a region of our solar system is located in a region of the galaxy that is 25 to 26,000 miles away from the center of the galaxy. So, those energies, visible and invisible, that race outward from the middle of the galaxy into the rest of the galaxy hit us every time. No, let me slow down. The energies that are hitting us right at this very second started their journey from the center of the galaxy 26,000 years ago. 5 seconds from now, those energies that are hitting us, because they're still hitting us, they never stop, started their journey 26,000 years ago, and 5 seconds. There's no coincidence in the fact that this energies that come and hit us from the galaxies, which started out 26,000 years ago, and this 26,000 year great year precession equinox, there's a connection. Because what the ancients in Africa did, maybe even before the Egyptian priests, they learned how to read those energies, access them, detect them, and read them, and that's how they knew how to create the book of the heavens. So they knew what energies were coming, when they were coming, and what they meant. And they codified it in the book of heavens. Maybe as far back as 50,000 years ago. Maybe even before that. In Africa. So they always knew what was going to happen. Always. They even knew that the destruction of black civilization was going to happen. They knew it was coming. Why do you think they went into those monuments and chiseled all of their knowledge into those monuments and temples and obelisks? Yeah, they wrote in papyrus too, but they knew that most of that wasn't going to survive. So they laboriously chiseled everything into the walls of the temples, onto the obelisks, into the tombs, everywhere. So so that was going to last because they knew everything was going to fall apart. Things fall apart in the center. They knew that was going to happen because they could read the flow of the energies that defined human, not only human, the existence of the world, the cosmos, and its destiny. They knew. There isn't anything they didn't know. That's why they did it. That's why when we talked about the Dogon today, at intervals they sent groups of their priests westward across the Sahara, usually in response to invasion. It's all connected. Next slide, please. This is a galaxy. This is what the Milky Way looks like. That is not actually the Milky Way, but the Milky Way looks exactly like that. Spiral galaxy. Kind of almost like a swastika. Next slide, please. Now, I'm trying to figure out why I put this in here. I think I know. Okay, the Great Pyramid was built of somewhere between 2.4 and 2.8 million blocks of stone. The smallest was 2.5 tons. The largest was either somewhere between 60 and 100 tons. It is said if you could have taken the intact masonry of the Great Pyramid, dismantled it, you could have built a wall 4 feet high going 18,500 miles around the globe. In other words, you could have built the whole Great Wall of China just from the masonry of the Great Pyramid. And yet, the base of the Great Pyramid, each of the sides of the base, 755 feet and 6 inches. And the deviation was less than 1 inch on each side. Oriented precisely to the 4 cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. Remember, this is the reason why in every traditional system, not just African, there's always an obeisance done to the 4 cardinal points. All right? Now, I think there's more to say about the Great Pyramid, but we don't have time. But the point is that one of the way in which they oriented the pyramid was that they took the pole star that was in place at that time, 3,340 BC, and they used that to orient the north face of the pyramid, and therefore once you have the north face oriented, you can easily orient the other 4 faces, and they created the descending passage in such a way, so straight, so smooth, that every time that north pole star reached its zenith, in the north, it would shine right down that descending passage and reflect on a pool at the bottom. So this is one of the ways in which they kept track, at that time anyway, of the, shall we say, the cycles and the functions that were happening in the North Pole. Next slide, please. I kind of want to keep going on. Let's keep going. All right. Now, what we're going to do is that we're going to go through. You see, because you got two great years going side by side, both of them the same length, both of them caused by the same phenomenon, but one tracked through the North Pole and the other tracked through the zodiac. The North Pole stars stay in place 3,700 years. The equinox, the constellations of the equinox stay in place 2,155 years, 58 years. And they only come together once in 26,000 years. Now, 761 BC. This is at the North Pole. The constellation we today call Hercules ruled the North Pole. But the ancient Egyptians, people of Nile Valley, it was Shu, who is the one who held up the heavens, and who was a lion deity. And it was called the Kneeler. Just like Hercules was called, this Hercules was called the Kneeler, he's wearing a lion cloak. So what they did, the Greeks took Shu and turned him into Hercules. But he was the one who ruled the North Pole 12,761 BC. The one who supported the heavens. Next slide, please. Okay, very soon after that, now we are back, we're going to have to shift back and forth from the North Pole to the zodiac around the equator. Actually, it's between 47 degrees between the two tropics. Now, the great year, the precessional great year related to the zodiac around the tropics begins in Leo 10,909 BC. 10,909 BC. And we know that the Sphinx was built 10,500 BC. How do we know that? We got a couple of reasons to know that, but I only talk about one, again, in the interest of time. The Sphinx faces due east in such a way that it is oriented perfectly to the rise of the constellation Leo right before dawn on the equinox, 10,500 BC. So in other words, if you go backwards in time, you will find that the Sphinx is oriented eastward toward the rise of the constellation Leo, who's what? The lion, 10,500 BC. So this starts from the point of view of the zodiacal ages, the age of Leo, the lion. A lot of lion symbolism at that time. Atum is Leo, Shu is Leo, Tefnut is Leo. And everything that goes along with that lion symbolism, which is very solar, by the way. And Atum is probably this time that perhaps Heliop, what we call the city of the sun, was built. Because Atum is the deity of the sun before Ra. He is also the prototype in name and function of Adam. Because he's the father. He's called the father. He is the first deity, male deity, to represent in human form. And his name, part of his name means father. Next slide, please. Sekhmet, goddess of the sunfire, patron goddess of precision. So she also derives from the age of the lion, Leo. in its feminine form. Now, she was a goddess to be feared because she could and did bring destruction. Famine, pestilence, disease, death. But interestingly enough, she is also the goddess of priest-physicians. Why is that? Because if she could bring famine, pestilence, death, and disease, she could also prevent and ward off famine, pestilence, death, and disease. She's also, like I said, the goddess of the fire itself. She's also the goddess of sexual heat. Very, very powerful deity. She too comes from the time of the age of Leo, starting 10,909 BC. Next slide, please. Now, we're jumping back. Like I said, we're doing this. It seems a little awkward, but I'm trying to give you a sense of how these two ages are marching together, more or less side by side. And we're back, because they work at any given time. There are two forces at work. For example, right now, the sun is in the north. The North Pole is in the little bear, which is really the jackal. And Pisces is the zodiac constellation rising right before the sun. So we are both in the age of Pisces and in the age of the jackal, both. Always there are two of these kind of energies at work, always and forever, okay? Now, let's now look 9058 BC, because the pole star moves from Hercules, or Shu, into Boötes, who is actually Osiris, because Boötes is the celestial plowman. And Osiris is the father of growing grain, and this is probably the time when men began to exert some influence on agriculture. Before that time, agriculture was virtually exclusively a feminine occupation and under total feminine control. How did that change? That changes with the plow. You bring an instrument into it, a tool, things get masculinized. So Osiris is the Egyptian form of Boötes. And it's probably about this time that Osiris, as an agricultural deity, begins to rise to the fore. Because he was an agricultural deity before he was anything else. Okay? Next slide. Now we go down to the 8,751 BC. We're back into the zodiac. The scarab beetle age of Kepra, which today we would call Cancer. Because remember, that's what the Greeks did, right? They took Kepra and turned it into Cancer. But Kepra is the original archetype. And he is a symbol. Okay, why did the ancient Egyptians use all these animal and insect symbols? Because the activities and behaviors of these animals and insects represented or evoked certain kinds of power. Okay? For example, the scarab beetle. Right before the Nile flood, which used to come every year before the Aswan High Dam, you'll see scarab beetles along the banks of the river getting balls of mud and dung and rolling it and turning it, creating an almost perfect sphere. And inside that sphere of mud and dung, that's why scarabs are often called dung beetles, by the way. They have a very, very crucial function in nature, but that's another story. They have already deposited its eggs. Then they dig a hole, and they roll that ball of dung into the hole and cover it over. Then the Nile flood comes over and submerges it for 3 months. Then when the Nile flood recedes, those larvae, those beetle larvae that have been incubating all this time, literally fly up out of the mud. the image of that which emerges and flies and rises up and ascends up out of the primeval ooze or muck or mud, darkness if you like. That's the reason why the scarab beetle was also one of the symbols of the sun. Because what does the sun do at the end of its journey at night? It rises up out of the primal darkness in the east. And so this is the age, and so this is the reason why the scarab beetle, the dung beetle, again, was a very powerful image symbol in ancient Egypt, then and all the way to the very end of it. This is the reason why pregnant women would sometimes eat beetles to, not pregnant women, women seeking fertility would sometimes eat beetles. In both Kush, the so-called Sudan, and Egypt. Next slide, please. Then we move to the 6,593 BC, the age of the twins. There are two different kinds of twins. There's the male-female twins, which are Shu and Tefnut. And then there are the male twins, Set and Horus, which at this time are not antagonistic. Okay. They represent a period in which the world was seen as the world, the country, the clan, the nation was seen as a seamless combination of complementary opposites. This is when you can begin to glimmer the first historical glances back into ancient Egypt, because if you study any ancient Egyptian history, you know that right up to the time of the unification of Egypt under Menes, Egypt was called the Two Lands, the Twin Lands. And they called it the Twin Lands sometimes all the way to the end of its history. And in the first dynasties, the pharaohs, even though we had moved out of the age of the twins, before they had a Horus name and a Set name. And they kept that practice up all the way into the next age. So it was reflective of the age of the twins. You could also see it in the Bible with Cain and Abel. That goes back to a time, a prehistoric time, when the phenomenology, if I can use that word, of the twins dominated things. Okay, serpent in the sky, 5,355 BC. The age of Draco. You can see it here. This was sometimes in ancient Egypt shown as the hippopotamus. Two different types. This is the North Pole. Draco is probably the longest constellation in the entire northern sky. But you can see that it was serpent symbolism came to dominate or become paramount. Even today in traditional African societies, as well as in ancient Egypt, there is a very, very definite and palpable, tangible serpent symbolism. Now, if any of you have read Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, or No Longer at Ease, remember there's this scene in which those who have converted to Christianity come in and kill the sacred python. There are sacred pythons everywhere in Africa, traditionally speaking. And it goes back to the serpent symbolism, and the serpent has a lot of different levels of symbolism, because on the one hand, in the Dahomean view, it was the twin. First of all, the rainbow is the serpent, and when there's two rainbow, it's the Da and his wife Da Losu, and they were supposed to have been the one who carried out the work of creation under the direction of Mawu. The serpent is also a symbol of healing. You know, the staff with the snake twined around it? Why? Because the serpent does what in the spring? It loses sheds old skin for new, which is a symbol of renewal, which is a symbol of healing. One of the earliest symbols of the Great Mother was that of the python curling around its eggs. So again and again, you can see that serpent symbolism extremely powerful, and it was actually literally in the heavens, and you see that serpent symbolism all throughout ancient Egyptian history. The serpent had two different kinds of resonances, because it was also the power of death. Okay? And therefore had an anti-human aspect. So it resonated like that too. Which is, of course, the serpent that we encounter where? In Genesis. But we're coming to Genesis in a minute. We're going to come to Genesis in a minute. Next slide. Osiris the bull, 4,434 BC. This is the beginning of the dynastic age in ancient Egypt. The age of Chares, and this is you can see it in their history. You see, if you look at their history carefully, you can see what happens in Egypt when these ages change. Because now Memphis becomes the capital. And Memphis is the sacred city for Ptah. And Ptah's image, his symbol is the bull. And Osiris. Osiris now is the one who begins to take on more than one aspect. And one of his more important symbols is the bull. And this is also the symbol, this is also the time of the great building projects of ancient Egypt. The pyramids were all built, the important pyramids of Giza. All the major pyramids were built during the time of Chares, the age of the bull, the power of masculine strength. Apis, who's a symbol of the Nile, becomes a very important deity. In fact, it reminds me of what the ancient Egyptians do, remind me of what the Tibetans do for the Dalai Lama. Whenever the reigning Apis bull dies, they go all over Egypt looking for one special mark. He had to have a white blaze right here. Black and white blaze. When they found him, then he became the new Apis bull. For 30 years. Because, and again, it represents a power that is manifested or revealed in this bull. They didn't worship the bull itself. The bull is just a manifestation of a power that animates the cosmos and comes to that particular time and this particular region of the universe and is active. They didn't worship animals. If you say that, then Christians must worship animals because they talk about the Lamb of God. If you're going to if as Christians one is going to accuse other people of worshiping animals, then you need to accuse yourself because you talk about the Lamb of God. You put him up there on the cross and call Jesus that. St. Augustine, this is real interesting. St. Augustine, who after St. Paul is probably the most important of the church fathers. He called Jesus the good scarab. That's what St. Augustine said. Okay. Okay, now this is when it begins to get interesting. This is the age of Aries, 2276 BC. The age of the ram. The capital of Egypt now shifts from Memphis to Waset or Thebes. The dominant deity becomes Amun. Amun's symbol is the ram. So now ram, lamb, and shepherd symbolism dominate the age. Not just in Egypt. Abraham is born during this time. according to the Genesis, one of the 5 books of Moses, Cain and Abel are both making offerings to God. Cain makes an offering of grain, and Abel makes an offering of a lamb. Which one is more favored by God? In the Genesis, it's the lamb. That's why Cain gets angry and kills Abel. When Isaac is about ready to be sacrificed, what happens? They find a ram in the bush, I think a lamb, and God says, no, don't do this. Here's a ram, sacrifice. Why? Because the sacrifice is both purificatory and it's a salvation instrument. When the so-called children of Israel are saved by the blood, it's the blood of the what? Of the lamb. So ram, lamb, and shepherd symbolism dominate this whole age. And then when they get to Sinai, no. What's the name of that mountain? You know, the mountain where the 10 Commandments. It's not. I'm blocking. I'm blocking on where it is, but it's where Moses stops and goes up the mountaintop and gets the 10 Commandments. And while he's gone, children of Israel get nervous. And so what do they tell Aaron to do? Create a golden calf. And then when Moses comes down from the mountain, he throws down the tablets and he gets angry because Aaron has made the golden calf. Why? His anger, you say, well, the anger is because it's idolatry. Well, you could use that explanation if you want to. But you got to understand, we are now in the age of Aries the ram. The ram, lamb, and shepherd symbolism dominates the age. So the bull or the calf represents something that has come and gone. Now this is what happens when you move from age to age. The symbols of the earlier age do persist into the next age. And this is what was happening there. They couldn't quite disconnect themselves from that ancient archetype. But it was the new archetype under the symbol of the lamb, ram and shepherd, which dominate the age. Saved by the blood of the lamb. No, no, it's not Ararat. That's where the Noah Ararat. It was where the ark settled. Just blocking on the name of the mountain. Anyway. Okay, listen. So you can see where ancient Nile Valley is concerned, the way in which things shifts as the ages shifts. There are shifts in tone, symbols, energies, religious perspective, and yet it's all still very seamless. There's not necessarily a conflict, but it does mean that there's always a period of where things are breaking down in order for the new order, as determined by these cosmic forces, codified by the ancient Egyptians, are coming into play for the new world, the new order. Okay, to continue, we're going to go back and focus on the shifts at the North Pole. And this shift brings us to 1652 BC, when Anubis wept what? Jackal, fox, wolf, moves to the North Pole. And if you remember the zodiac of Dendra that we showed before, although it wasn't that easy to see, you could see where the North Pole was. That was in the zodiac of Dendra. That's where the jackal was. As I said, it was only when the Greeks began to change some of the names and images that the jackal turned into the little bear. Okay? Or what they call little bear, little dipper. But if you're going back to the original archetype, you go to the jackal, wolf, fox. All right? 1652 BC. And you notice in the Egyptian religious system that Anubis and his status really rises up to the fore. He becomes the companion of Isis. He becomes the very essential in the process of I'm trying to say the words. In the funerary rites, the mummifier, the one who works with Osiris in mummifying Osiris and then mummifying the dead. So he becomes very, very important. And as Wepwat, he is the opener of the way. That means he's the guide of souls. Now, it isn't just in Egypt. In Rome, their mythology says that Romulus and Remus, who founded Rome, was suckled by a she-wolf. In human affairs, the dog becomes, as they call him, man's best friend. He even begins to be a shepherd, to assist man as a shepherd, herding cattle and sheep. The point is that again, this archetype began, and in the South, among three other places really, where you see this. There is among the Songhai peoples of what is now Mali. And of course, at one time they had the biggest empire in Africa. And they talk about their ancient history. They said that they were led from Egypt across the Sahara by a jackal. The Dogon, we've already talked about him earlier today. One of the most important of the nomos, although he was considered the personification of chaos and disorganization, was Ogo the fox, who's also the master of speech. Because the Dogon say Amma, who is the creator, manifested as Ogo the fox in the disorganization of the universe, because the universe has to be disorganized first in order to be reorganized. Among Southwest Indians, one of their most important figures in their mythology is the coyote. Even in Greece, the god Apollo, the god of their deity, the sun, had a manifestation as a wolf. Aristotle, in deference to Apollo, called his school the Lyceum, which means wolf school. So over and over again, you see these, this whole symbol energy that emanates or evokes, that is evoked from this canine symbolic figure, whether jackal, dog, wolf, or fox, not only in Egypt, but a lot of different places. Among the Vodou, one of their most important deities, the deity you never want to mess with, is Elegba. Elegba is the opener of the way. He's also the trickster. And if you offend him, he just makes life miserable for you. But he's often represented walking with the dog. The dog is his sacred animal. Now, go forward. Then Anubis the Anointer. Go forward. Yeah, Wepwat Ursa Minor. Okay, let's stay right there. Because Wepwat, or the jackal, displaces Draco the dragon. Now, one of the images of the pole is a tree. And throughout Africa, the tree climbing snakes literally wind themselves around the tree. Pythons are very often tree-dwelling snakes, and other kinds of snakes are too. Now, something ought to be, yeah, not only medical, but why, who is in the tree dispensing apples? The snake. And then, what happens, when he gets caught, what they say, what happens? God says, get out of the tree. You're going to crawl on the ground. That's the end of the age of Draco. Draco literally falls out of the tree, which is the pole. So that whole Genesis story about the tree and the snake being made to crawl on the ground, although he would start out in the tree, is a reflection of what happened here in the cosmos, in the cosmic, in the astronomical history. It's all in the book of heavens first. Once you understand that, you can understand a whole lot about a whole lot of things, including Genesis and much of the Old Testament. Next slide, please. And we've already talked about earlier today the Dogon pale fox. And we showed that he is also the master of speech and divination, as well as being the author of chaos and disorganization. But he's essential to the growth and development of the world. Next slide, please. Okay. 118 BC. The equinoxes now move out, or no, I should say Aries no longer rises before dawn. The two fishes, Pisces, arise before dawn. Now here, interestingly, is a symbol of Horus in Pisces that is a late Egyptian symbol, because he's holding the fish, which is a symbol of Pisces, right? But he's standing on the dog. The dog is Ursa Minor. Sinusaurus is a Wepwap the jackal, which we call Ursa Minor. So the ancient Egyptians are showing you the way in which, through Horus, these two archetypes, cosmic archetypes, are connected. He's showing you how these things are working together, synergistically. Now, age of Pisces. The age of the double fishes. And who says to his prospective disciples, come, I will make you fishers of men. Who goes up on the mountaintop in order to feed the multitudes, multiplies what? 2 fishes and 5 loaves of bread. The Pharisees confront him and say, give us a sign that you are who you say you are. And he says, this is a wicked generation, and the only sign I will give it is a sign of Jonah. And Jonah is what? The fish man. He also says, there will be portents in the sun, moon, and stars, and the celestial powers will be shaken. What is he talking about? He's talking about the shift of these ages. Who is this that we're talking about? Who is this King of Glory? Next slide, please. There are 8 primordial powers among the Dogon. They all, among other things, take the form of fishes. There's always a male and female pair, 4 male female pair as fishes, the double fishes. Interesting enough, you see the larger fish is female. We'll come back to this in a minute. Next slide, please. Let's talk about the Dogon Christ, the Piscean dispensation in West Africa. Among the Dogon, their 8 ancestral spirits are fish beings called Nomo. The third one of these Nomos serves as the Dogon savior. Now his antagonist is Ogo, who takes the form of a fox. He has a fish manifestation too, but mostly he's known as a fox. The third one of these is Nomo, who serves as the Dogon savior. The third Anagono is called Onomo, Nomo of the pond. It will be, this is the Dogon speaking, it will be sacrificed for the purification and reorganization of the universe after the wicked deeds of its twin. It will resurrect in human form and descend on earth on an ark with ancestors of man. Nomo Anagono, the sacrifice victim, will be resurrected. He is first tied to a tree standing up, arms outstretched, and attached to 2 branches extending at right angles from the tree. The Dogons say that in order to save the world, the sacrifice victim must experience great suffering. And this is the position of greatest suffering, according to the Dogon. Pale fox. I didn't make any of this up. Next slide, please. The Christos in Egypt. The word Christos first makes its appearance in the Greek language in Alexandria, capital of the ruling Ptolemies of Egypt, about 280 BC, with the meaning of anointed. Heretofore, it had no apparent existence in the Greek language. You couldn't find it anywhere in the Greek language until about this time, 280 BC, when the Macedonians, Greeks, were ruling Egypt. It would have risen, therefore, and it would have arisen from the Egyptian word charis, a word signifying the anointed and mummified Osirified being. In Egypt, the deceased was washed, anointed with oils and resins, and wrapped in bandages in preparation for burial and resurrection. In the Gospel of John, it is said, they took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with spices and strips of linen cloth according to Jewish burial customs. Jesus was in effect mummified. He was first the anointed Osirified Chares, who then became the anointed Christos or Christ. The historical Jesus lived longer than what they say, and he spent most of his formative years in Egypt. Most. That's a whole other story. Next slide, please. This whole idea of the Piscean, the fish image and symbolism, the 4 divine fishers for Horus, capturing the wicked in the net. Next slide, please. The parable of the fishes in the net. I forget which gospel this comes from. Sorry about that. The kingdom of heaven is like a net cast into the sea and gathered all kinds of fish. Let's go back. Go forward. You want to find something about your Christianity, go into the Egyptian system. It's all there. And when you can't find the Egyptian system, go into the Dogon system, because the rest of it's there. Next slide. The Christian Pisces. The fish's first known use as a Christian religious symbol was sometime in the first 3 centuries AD. Christians began using the word for fish, ichthys, as an acronym for Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. ICHTHYS is an anagram for Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. Next slide, please. Now, here's where the rubber starts to meet the road. Pisces, the age of Pisces, that is to say, the constellation of Pisces will stop rising heliacally, that is right before dawn, about 2039, 2040. Something like 31 to 31 years from now. The next constellation that will start rising at right before dawn is the constellation Aquarius. That means the age of Pisces is coming to an end in 30-ish years, and the age of Aquarius will begin. Let's look at this. What must be understood about Aquarius is that the archetype, though currently represented by the male water bearer, was originally feminine as the great nurse, great mother of the waters. In ancient times, she would have been Hathor Nut, goddess of the heavenly waters, pouring out water to the thirsty souls traveling through Amenta. Nut was always shown wearing a water vase on her head. The archetypal femininity of Aquarius is actually shown in the figure of Hapi, the Nile god, and a late form of Aquarius because Hapi is usually depicted as a man with a female breast. As with Ursa Minor, originally the jackal in the Egyptian circumpolar planisphere, it is critical to understand the original archetypology of the current representation because the true essence of the symbol sign resides there. For the purpose of grasping the energetic ethos of the emerging Aquarian age, it is necessary to recognize that it is a matter of the advent or the commencement of the great age of the great mother of the waters, or the age of not of Aquarius, but Aquaria. Water bearer in the feminine form. It is through this archetype that the meaning and purpose of the age can be interpreted. Next slide, please. This is the Egyptian river deity, male, female god of the water, Mer or Hapi. Notice, as I say, he has a female breast. So even when, in ancient Egypt, when he was represented in male form, he always had a feminine character because the older archetype was feminine and maternal. Next slide, please. The great mother of the waters, Hathor Nut, the age of Aquarius, 2040 AD. This is Hathor Nut pouring out water from the sycamore tree to the thirsty soul in the underworld, traveling through the underworld toward the judgment. Also, his soul, that's a symbol of his soul, being refreshed by Hathor with food and water. So this is the ancient Egyptian form of what we're calling Aquaria. Next slide, please. Now, more contemporaneously, these are images of the great mother of the water, Mami Wata Yemanya Oshun. The great mother of water has two aspects. On the one hand, she's maternal, and her element is the ocean. On the other hand, she is sensuous and beautiful, and her element is fresh waters. They are both aspects of the same archetype. It is necessary to think of them as a single unit, as it were, though Oshun is going to predominate. But the Yemanya aspect will always be there. Next slide, please. This is Mami Siren Oshun. Mami Wata Siren Oshun, the reigning archetype of the Aquarian age, because there is a feminine figure in West Africa who unites both aspects seamlessly in one person. And she is called Mami Wata. And she has somewhere between 40 million and 50 million adherents from Ghana all the way to the Congo. And this is one of her forms. She's always usually depicted as a mermaid. And like Oshun, she always has a mirror or a fan. Gold or yellow is her color. She likes honey. She likes sweet things. And this, if you want to see what the Aquarian age is going to mean, these are the archetypes you must consider. 2030, about 2039, 2040. Some of you in this room, some of us in this room might actually see the beginning of that age, if you can live so long. Next slide, please. Now, I already showed you Cepheus in one of the early slides, showing you the constellations around the pole. Let's talk about Cepheus. Because Cepheus this is what I didn't say, he's the Ethiopian king. The coming Ethiopian king in the polar precession. In the circumpolar precession, the constellation Cepheus will begin to supersede Ursa Minor, which is also the jackal, around 2051 AD. So that's about 42 years from now. It may actually take 300 years for the constellation to arrive at its closest point to the pole, but that does not materially affect the commencement of the polar Cepheid age itself. In Greek mythology, Cepheus was the king of Joppa, which is actually Phoenicia. His wife was Cassiopeia, and his daughter Andromeda, all of whom figure prominently in the Greek myth of Perseus, who severed the head of the Gorgon, rescued, then married Andromeda. What is remarkable about Cepheus is that he and his entire family are nearly always represented as Ethiopian. Always. Cepheus is therefore the heavenly Ethiopian king. Mythology or no, the ancient Greeks assumed that Cepheus was a real historical person who would have ruled over an empire, perhaps what was then called Eastern Ethiopia, before the time of the sack of Troy around 1200 BC. That empire would seem to have included parts of Phoenicia because Joppa was an ancient and important Phoenician seaport. Perseus is considered an ancestor of the Greeks, which, since he was married to Andromeda, the Ethiopian princess, would point to an Ethiopian ancestry for the Greeks as well. Next slide, please. This is what it looks like in the, you can actually see Cepheus on a clear night. Actually, it's not easy to see him because he's not that distinct. But if you can see, you can always, on a clear night, in the north, around the North Pole, you can always see Cassiopeia. It's always easier to make her out. And then you look to the left of where she is, kind of left, and you can kind of make out Cepheus. Cassiopeia is his wife. She's a symbol of the throne and the seat. She's like Isis, really. You see, and this is Polaris. This is Ursa Minor, or the jackal. And see, Cepheus is moving that way. And when he gets there, he will rule for 3,700 years. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at Cepheus in the zodiac of Dendra, he's represented as an ape because the cynocephalic ape is a symbol of Thoth, master of wisdom and learning. Why? Because the cynocephalic ape chatters at dawn, or right before dawn. And so he's a symbol of the herald and also of the messenger. And Thoth, among other things, was the messenger, the symbol of mind, will, intelligence, and of the speech and the word, divine speech. So one of his symbols is the ibis-headed bird and the cynocephalic ape. This is the reason why you find Cepheus in the zodiac of Dendra represented as an ape. Okay? Now, the other thing, let's go forward and then we'll talk about that. Now, that means there's an aspect of Cepheus that embodies Thoth or Jehudi, who is also called Thoth Hermes, the master of all learning, all wisdom, all divine speech. So in this Cepheus, even though Cepheus is royal and a king, there is a strong element of the power of Thoth and the manifestation of Thoth or Jehudi. Next slide, please. Now, if you come to the present day and you want to know who is Cepheus in your modern African representations, you have to go, if you go to the Yoruba, you go to Obatala, Lord of the White Cloth. If you go to the Vodou, you go to Lisa. If you are Senegalese and you go to the Rabs, you go to Ma Tulifai. Interestingly enough, if you look at Obatala, there's several symbols of Obatala. One is the horse, the white horse. That's one of his symbols. The other is the snail. The third one is the gorilla. That's one of his animal manifestations. So, and his sacred number is 8. And that's the sacred number of Thoth. So it all comes forward. So this is, as it were, a representation of the emerging cosmic Ethiopian king in terms of the archetypology, the divine symbolism. Lord of the White Cloth. So he is both king and sage. So he is the one who presides over justice and wisdom and healing. When you see him like this with a sword, it's not really aggressive. He is the protector of the city. He's the protector of the city. He's not someone who goes out and makes war, but he does defend the city or the country. He is a defender and a protector, as well as a wise man, sage, king. Next slide, please. Why do I put this up here? Because when the Yoruba connect, when the Christian missionaries first came in and started preaching the gospel of Jesus, the Yoruba automatically connected him to Obatala. And in Benin, Dahomey, they connected him to Lisa, who is the Dahomean Obatala. Now, one of the things that I haven't mentioned so far, but there's time to mention this. I've already mentioned one thing, and that is, whenever you move from one age to the next, there's always an ongoing breakdown of the old order. Always it happens. It could be very violent or not so violent. What is happening now? Just consider this. In the 20th century, leading up to these ages, there were 200 million people killed by war, atrocity, or political violence. And we're not talking about famine and disease, natural death. We're talking about slaughter. 200 million people. 10 million in World War I. Stalin killed 20 million. 60 million in World War II. Half of those killed by Hitler. 45 million killed by Mao in his own country. Pol Pot, 2 million. And you start adding it up. War, atrocity, or political violence, in 100 years, it added up to 200 million people. And you might say it's still going on. However, the other thing to say is there's always harbingers of the shape of things to come. There are always advance notices. There's always signs of the things that are going to happen if you know what you're looking at. Next slide, please. Okay, this is an ancient symbol of the Ethiopian king Pianki, 750 BC, Egypt's 25th dynasty, from the Napatan Kush. So he's, as it were, again, an ancient archetype of the Ethiopian king, literally. Next slide, please. Modern Ethiopian king was none other than Rastafari Haile Selassie. This is about 1933. Who became the divine king of, next slide, please. Haile Selassie, King of Kings, conquering Lion of Judah. This is all Kefian. And he becomes the divine king for, next slide, the Rastafari. Within a few years after he was crowned, that's when the Rastafari movement was born in Jamaica. So those two things together, the accession of Haile Selassie and the emergence of the Rastafari movement, both together symbolize the first sign of the coming cosmic Ethiopian king. 1930s. Because what happens with these archetypes, these shifts in ages, the signs and symbols start showing up about 100 years or more, 100 to 150 years before the actual beginning of the age. You start seeing the signs 100 to 150 years before that. Okay? And in every case, you see it. Without a, there's always a sign. Everybody in the ancient world knew that somebody was coming. They knew somebody was coming. In fact, since everybody knew, several Roman emperors tried to make themselves as that coming Messiah. They tried to present themselves as that, including Julius Caesar. But everybody knew, they didn't know who or where it was going to happen, but they knew a Christ figure was coming. That was no surprise. It was just a matter of who was going to be and where it was going to take place. Because they were still, at that time, in touch with and sensitive to these shifts and movements. Divinely inspired, but cosmically determined. In a way that we lost altogether over the last 2,000 years. Now, next slide. And we see here the Rastafari in ceremonial white because Obatala is known as the Lord of the White Cloth. All of his followers have to wear white all the time. That's just what they have to do. Because he's a Lord of white cloth, and here you see them. These Rastafari elders dressed in Obatala's color as Lord of the White Cloth. Again, at the same time, while their whole sense of, they are divinely inspired by the figure of and the example of Rastafari Haile Selassie, the last crowned Ethiopian king. And yet, the sign of the coming Ethiopian king. Next slide, please. The second sign was the Million Man March. I don't care who called it, Farrakhan or whatever, but what happened was far bigger than than any one person. There's something, see, this is what I'm saying. People are touched by these powers and these energies without even knowing it consciously. And they are pulled into these events. So what I'm saying is that, yeah, these are cosmic destinies that were writ at the center of the galaxy 25,000 years ago, but we're feeling them right here and now. And if you have any doubt about that, the next slide should, this is the third sign. Once I figured out, I was like everybody else, this is impossible. There is no black man that's going to be president of the United States in my lifetime. Then after a while, I said, wait a minute. Then I said, something came to me one day. But wait a minute. This is the time of the coming of the cosmic Ethiopian king in about 40 years. And I started watching, I said, oh, it's Obama. Once I figured that out, about a year ahead of time, I said, he's in. It's guaranteed. I'm not even worried about it. It's happening. And it's beyond him. He has just been chosen for that moment by something, some power greater than himself, or in fact greater than the world. And once that happened, I even said to people, I said, yeah, he's in. He's in. It's going to happen. Because this is something, and when you realize that, then you realize you don't control nothing. Individually, collectively, there's nothing you control. You just think you do. You don't control a bloody thing. When I say we don't. Individually, collectively. The other thing too is I finally realized, 61 years old, so many of these revelations coming in my dotage. I said, most of us think we know what's best for ourselves. And almost none of us really do. So once you understand that there are powers that you simply have absolutely no control over that are at work, then maybe you can begin to understand why all religions, all spiritual systems talk about the importance of submission and surrender. Not necessarily submission and surrender to a person, but submission and surrender to those forces that are guiding human destiny. And you know what? It's not a secret. It's not a mystery. You can figure it out in your own lives. If you open yourself up to it, of course. We don't. We have a cacophony of white noise in our brains all the time. Either we're talking to ourselves, somebody is talking to us, or we're watching the damn TV, or we're on the internet, or we're listening to the radio, and we have no place in our lives for silence. So the messages can't get in. So that's why we're so clueless about everything. And we get caught unawares. Don't know why this has happened. And we just haven't been listening. This was ordained. And it was ordained by powers that, if you took all human power on the earth and put it together, you weren't going to stop that. You can call it what you want. If you want to call it God, call it God. If you want to call it Yahweh, call it Yahweh. If you want to call it Allah, call it Allah. If you want to call it the Orishas, call it the Orishas. Call it whatever you want to call it. Just know that there are powers at work way beyond you, coming from the deep recesses of the cosmos, that are directly impacting human life right here and now, and will continue to do so. And there's nothing anybody can do to change what's going to happen. This is really the reason why it was important to do this Wheel of Heaven, Ife. Because what you're trying to do is begin to just introduce the idea that there's something at work. And really, the only thing that you can do is either align yourself with it or get out of the way. There are a lot of people who are trying to resist. A lot of people who are doing everything they can to dismantle Obama and his administration. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. I'm not saying he's Jesus Christ, but it's very similar. That's what they tried to do with him. I'm not trying to make a comparison, but there is something that's similar because he was chosen for this. And not by any human power. Doesn't mean we're supposed to worship him. That isn't it. But we ought to know who he is, what he's there for, why, and get on the train. That might be my last slide. Is it? Okay. Ultimately, if there is anything, as I already said, that informs why we did this today, perhaps it was just to bring you to that last slide. Not just because of Obama himself, but because you have to know these forces impact you individually as well as collectively, right at this very moment. And from now on for the rest of your life, or any other lives that you may have. And all of this is going to get stronger, not weaker. Stronger and stronger and stronger. And it's going to happen, and you, like I said, you either align with it or just become irrelevant. Thank you for your time and patience and attention.
In connection to the earlier lecture, how does the wheel of heaven manifest in the Dogon cosmology?
Cosmology, cosmogony.
Yes, cosmogony.
Yeah. In a couple of ways. One is, as we showed at the end of that Dogon lecture, they already knew about that procession, that great year. They talked about, remember, the circle of the world, yes, and the top of the world turning. Now, my opinion only, okay? I'm not speaking for anybody but myself. There's a way, as far as I'm concerned, where the dispensation of the Piscean Age, which we know as historical Christianity, got hijacked. Egypt was actually where Christianity was formed, really. And then with Constantine, the Roman emperor, he basically co-opted Christianity for his own political purposes. And Christianity was never the same after that. And Christianity, as it were, historical Christianity, after the Nicene Council, turned its back on its Piscean essence, to me, in my opinion. So that the one people who most fully embody the essence of the Piscean Age in their, I don't know, world system, is that the way to put it, are the Dogon. And it's seen in their symbols. It's seen in the symbols of the Nomo. It's seen in the whole description of the Nomo as Anagono, who is the savior of the world, who sacrifices himself for the world, and is actually crucified in that process. So all of that symbolism that is so deeply embedded in what we think of Christianity is found independently in the Dogon system, in a way that is much more deeply connected to those cosmic reference points. Okay? The other thing too is, which we didn't show up here, is the Dogon says that the sacrificed Savior sacrifices his body in order to feed mankind. That's what the Dogon say. And of course, what did the Christ say? My flesh is real food, my blood is real drink. He who eats of me, who eats my body and drinks my blood, dwells in me and I dwell in him. So even that concept is found in the Dogon. So if you want to see a kind of deep, cosmically grounded Piscean system, it is the Dogon.
Next question. By E.G., I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Ramu. How do men align with Obatala and women align with Mamawata?
Okay.
And how do the Dogon align and pull from Anagona?
Yeah. Now the thing is, though the archetype of the Great Mother of the Waters, of course, is feminine and it's going to have that essence, it also means that men and males themselves have to reconnect with that side of themselves that they have neglected, abandoned, and rejected for about 2,000 years. You might say the feminine side of themselves. They too, we're not only talking about the women have to realign with that energy of the Great Mother of the Waters, so do men. And the same thing with the cosmic Ethiopian king. Now, what you have found over the last several thousand years, and you see this in leadership in different countries in the world over several thousand years, is that the idea of a king is as a martial hero, as a warrior, as a conqueror. Well, Obatala or Lisa or the cosmic Ethiopian king is something very different. He is a higher, you might say a much more benign masculine energy, if you ask me. Because his symbolism, his essence, is going to be focused on the idea of justice, healing, wisdom, and protection. The warrior energy, I don't think, is going to disappear, but the emphasis on the warrior energy is going to be minimized somewhat, it's going to be diminished somewhat in favor of a type of masculine type that is embodied in what I call the sage king or the philosopher king.
This question comes from Keith. Can you explain the correlation of precession between the universe, the earth, and within ourselves?
Well, you see, it's all part of the same continuum. That is to say, what is happening in the universe is happening within ourselves, and even as small and as insignificant as we are, things that happen with us and to us do reverberate well beyond us. There is a concept called chaos theory. And what chaos theory teaches us after beginning about 40, almost 50 years ago, is that a butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon can ultimately cause cyclones in Kansas. Because the weather patterns in the world are so complex, have such intricate feedback mechanisms, are so sensitively dependent on initial conditions, that the smallest, minutest change can cause vast changes in the rest of the world. Now, I use that example to say that individuals, even small individual acts here on Earth, have ramifications way beyond the individual himself, out even into the cosmos. If we are all energy, and if we are all creative energy, and we all participate in the same energetic field, which we do, and if we are all manifestations of the energetic field, one little disturbance in the force, so to speak, ramifies, okay? Now, what the ancients in Africa did were able to, as it were, codify through this whole concept of the great year and the idea of the book of heavens, the way in which these energies affect us, impact us, shape our destinies, past, present, and future. Okay? So, as I was saying, what happens at the center of the galaxy ultimately impacts us here. And what they were able to do is able to read those energies and codify them in this cosmic calendar, which we call the great year, so that we have some sense of what's happening and therefore to be prepared for it.
This question comes from Sister Yazoo. According to the lecture today, the age of Aquarian will be issued in around 2050.
No, 2039.
Okay.
Aquarius is 2039. Cepheus is 2050.
What significance does the year 2012 AD, if any, as a time for the ages to change from Pisces to Aquarius?
Everybody asks me that, and I never have a good answer because I really don't know. It's a Mayan, that's part of the Mayan calendar. And everybody always wants to know, what does this Mayan calendar signify given the system you're describing? And I said, I don't have a good answer for that because I don't really quite understand the connection myself. I think 2012 is indeed a significant year. I believe that the Mayan calendar and the Mayans, although they derive from the Olmecs, also were sensitively attuned to these cosmic vibrations, if you like, or the cosmic energy. What I think you might see as a result of the 2012 is not the end of the world, as what people say, but it does represent, you might say, a kind of, let me see if I can get the right metaphor. It's like what I think might happen is that one door is going to close and another is going to open in 2012. We're already moving toward that. You know, it's like a dividing line. And then after that, we are going to move headlong toward these shift ages that I've talked about, 2039 and 2050. People keep asking me, I said, I believe that what you see in the world, the violence, the conflict in the world, I think it's going to get worse. The domestic violence and conflict we see in this country, what we see abroad and elsewhere, where everything is breaking down. Nothing is sacred anymore. Nothing holds together. I think that's going to continue to get worse. But there is a time when it's going to shift and start moving the other way. Now, whether 2012 is that time, I don't know. But I do think 2012 does represent a dividing line that will afterwards move us inexorably toward these ages that are coming toward us.
Is the universe finite, or are there universes? What's your take on the scholarship of Stephen Hawking?
Well, I mean, I think you would have to be a physicist to adequately either evaluate or appreciate Stephen Hawking himself. I don't think there's much doubt that there are multiple universes. The Dogons certainly say there are. They say there are a total of 28 universes. A man named Don Juan Matus, who was a Yaqui Indian sage, said there are 48 universes. Even in modern astrophysics and cosmology, there is a theory that talks about superposed universes at the time of the Big Bang. So they were there in potentiality, and then when the Big Bang happened, all these universes came into being at the same time. So even physics accepts the probable reality of multiple universes. And physics gives an age to this universe of somewhere between 13 and 14 billion years. That would presume, of course, that yes, this universe is finite.
Tanisha asked, are there signs ushering in the new era? And if so, how do you know when you are receiving or in line with the energy and info from the cosmos?
Well, we've already talked about the signs that are ushering in the age of the cosmic Ethiopian king. The signs that are ushering in the Great Mother of Waters, I think, has to do with the rise of what I see the feminine presence in the affairs of the world. Several countries now have women presidents. We have women in kind of important and influential positions in a lot of different areas of human life and human society. So I think what you're seeing along in that regard represents a re-arising feminine energy, which was long overdue. Now, it was one of the things that I said toward the end of my presentation. The only way that I know of as a recommendation to begin to, as it were, feel and therefore react to the energies that are impacting us on a minute-by-minute basis is to create a sanctuary of silence at some point in your day. Best time is early in the morning, between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. Why? Because the world is asleep, and you're not impacted by the attention of the waking world. And you can live in this zone of silence. And as a friend of mine who is a master meditator says, when you meditate, when you pray, you talk to God. When you meditate, God talks to you. And this is exactly what happens when you create this zone of silence at strategic times in the day, usually early in the morning. Then those spirits, those powers, those energies that are trying to communicate with you on a minute-by-minute basis, but you can't hear them because of the cacophony and noise that you are surrounded by, can in fact get through to you. And then you'll be surprised what they're willing to, what they do communicate. And you'll be surprised at your ability, therefore, then to begin to, if you're listening and taking what you are hearing to heart, to realign yourself with the way things are unfolding.
You might have just answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. To be aligned, is it spiritual? If not, what does it mean to
It's all of the above. It's in your physical life, your daily life, your spiritual life, your mental life, your physical life. You begin to live in a way that is consistent not only with the moment, but with the evolving moment. And you say, what do you mean by that? I can't really, these are not recipes. You can't just say, well, you do this, this, and this, and you'll have it all together. You yourself know what it is, and you yourself can access it. Because not everything can be just handed to you. But you begin to know, there's ways of realizing and understanding how to live in that way. And you don't necessarily have to be taught it. In a sense, all learning is really self-learning anyway. Or as somebody else said, all learning is really remembering. Okay? So that once you have begun to, as it were, through having these regular periods of silence or meditation, and once you begin to open yourself up to those powers that are trying to talk to you, because they are trying to talk to you, you will know what to do. Maybe not at that moment, maybe not next week or next month, but over time, you begin to know how your life is supposed to unfold. Because they'll tell you. Or if you can't figure it out, they'll tell you where to go, or they will lead you to where you have to go to help you figure it out. None of this is really mysterious or inaccessible. That's the whole point. Living an impeccable life is not inaccessible to anybody. But we're not listening.
Sounds like we got to pay attention. Huh?
Yeah.
In the presentation this morning, the black hole had 2 sizes. Can you clarify?
Well, yeah, well, there are black holes all over the universe, and they are different sizes. Some are supposed to be as small as a pinhead. Some are huge. So they can be different sizes, That's as much as I can say about that.
If the Bible is allegory, how do we know that a person called Jesus truly exists?
There are reasons to believe it, and there are what I'm saying. You see, that's the thing about what we think of as history. Every aspect or every conventional history always has what I call mythic elements into it. Now, if you go back, for example, to the history of the United States, very soon after he died, people started creating these stories about George Washington. He chopped down the cherry tree and went to his father and said, "I cannot tell a lie." That never happened. Never happened. Honest Abe walking 10 miles through the snow in order to return a nickel that was given to him in excess of what the change that he was due. Never happened. So what I'm saying is that when we talk about our important figures, there's always a kind of mythology that grows up around them. So when you look at, in fact, some cynical people say history is a collection of myths. It's just a matter of which myth you choose. Now, does that mean that everything about Jesus the Christ is mythical, allegorical? No. There are reasons to believe, good reasons, solid reasons to believe that he was a true, concrete historical figure. There's no reason not to believe that he was an extraordinary person. A person, you might even say, touched by the sparks of divinity. Certainly the ancient Egyptians believed in that. So I don't even doubt any of that. I don't doubt his healing capacities. I don't doubt his abilities to manipulate energy in such a way to create what people call miracles. In fact, that's what got him in trouble with the Pharisees, because you know what the ancient Jews used to call him? They used to call him the Egyptian sorcerer. I have the quote. I can give you the quote. If you have to send them to you, I'll give you the chapter and verse on that. It was a disparaging term, but they called him the Egyptian sorcerer. That's what they called Jesus. Yeah. I saw it, I read it. I had read it once and forgot about it, came back and read it, and my eyes just got big. Point is that he had a command. He was an adept and a sage. And he had command of those forces that allowed him to manipulate energy in such a way that it seemed like what he was doing was creating miracles, although the miracles that he was creating were actually very low-level stuff. I have been in Benin, and one of the, I don't know what you call them, shamans, came by, and he had a little container of palm wine. And he made me drink the palm wine, okay? And then right there in front of me as I was watching him, he passed his hands over the palm wine, gave it back to me, and it was water. Then he took it back, passed his hands over again, and it was palm wine. So this business of turning water into wine was not even one of Jesus' most important, not even, shall we say, the most significant of what he could do. That was low-level stuff. Why was he doing it at all? To get people's attention. He had to get his apostles' attention, first of all, because apostles were kind of shaky when you get right down to it. If you really look, they didn't know whether they were into this or not. You know, they had to be shown, they had to be cajoled, and he had to always blow their minds, as well as the people he was trying to touch. He didn't do it just with miracles, and he didn't do it just with his teachings, and of course he did it with his healing. So, I think I lost track of the question, but the point is, all those things I think were not only possible and probable, I think they did happen, but it doesn't mean that there weren't mythical, symbolic elements that got attached to his person. They most assuredly did.